My name is Seth Christensen. This is the Got Any Cows podcast. As Jonathan LaRue says, I may not know anything about anything else, but I do know a lot about cows.
You know cows. Well, welcome to the Got Any Cows podcast today. I am here with Seth. I may love cows more than my wife sometimes, Christensen. My name is Jonathan LaRue. We're going to keep this episode away from Haley's eyes so I don't get in trouble today, because we all know that's not true. We all know Seth loves Haley, but we all also know that he really loves his cows.
Yep, that's accurate.
So today we're here to talk about horses.
Yep, I love horses.
No, of course not. This is a cows podcast, right? We're talking about cows today. So Seth, we're today I get the opportunity to ask Seth some questions about cows. So we started together about 2018. We've been working good together ever since. But our herd was a little different than it is today. Could you refresh my memory a little bit on the type of cows we had, how many we're running, and kind of on this episode, I want to kind of talk about how did we get to where we're at now.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. Yep. So John and I, like John mentioned, we've been working together for the last 6 years. I'm here in Weston. John manages everything day to day on production, and then I handle stuff on genetics. And so today, going through some stuff on genetic selection. And in 2018, at the point in time, John and I brought our cattle here to Weston. Initially, we had primarily Black Angus cows. And so that would have been kind of the starting point at that point in time. What do you remember, John, of that first fall calving in 2018 when we had the cattle here for the first time?
I remember the low lines. We've talked about those before in previous podcasts. I remember, that first year, man, we had so many cows, and we didn't know where we were going to go with them. We didn't know what we were feeding them. I don't think we had a clear direction on what we were doing other than we're just trying to survive. We're trying to get our cows fed. And we had calves coming all the time.
Yep.
It seemed like we were just constantly calving. We were constantly moving cows around. And then we got these little babies that were trailing everywhere. And we didn't have all the equipment and all the fence. And so we were scrambling pretty hard. And we were just trying to figure out how to pay the bills and put food on the table.
Yep.
Like literally every day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%.
It was it felt like a mess. It felt well, we'll figure it out, but right now we're just trying to survive is what it felt like.
Yep. Well, and especially, from that point till now, I mean, at that point, a lot of it was just testing, you know what I mean? Figuring out all of the things. So on the production end, like we've talked about before, figuring out how we're going to go about feeding stuff and calving stuff and all those things. And on the genetics end, kind of testing a lot of different approaches, and that's what I wanted to go over today is just all those different approaches from then till now and kind of defining our genetic direction for the program here. And, there's a lot of different ways to go about genetics, and we've tried a whole pile of them. And I think that that's important. I mean, the fact that we did test a lot of these different things, it's not, our direction today is not just I kind of whipped out of thin air. This is what we think. It's having tested a whole pile of different approaches. We've tried a lot of different angles to how we did it, and going back to 2018, John and I first had the cows here, and at that point in time, there would have been all Angus at that point. And we had them broken down into 4 different lines within Angus as far as how we were breeding those cattle. And so even you can still see today on some of the cows out there, 2018 models, they'll have the line marked into their ear tag, right above which John would have written right in there, thrown in those tags. So at that point, they would have been calving ease, growth, marbling, and longevity. And they were bred as 4 separate lines, with the goal being that we could maximize any one of those traits if we kept them separate. And made it, I guess, as targeted as possible in those mating selections. So if somebody told me I need a calving ease bull, we had no question. I mean, those were stacked calving ease on calving ease. There was zero question those babies were going to be born unassisted. They asked for a calving ease bull. They were getting a calving ease bull.
Yeah.
And the same went for growth. The same went for marbling and for longevity. If somebody told me they're breeding heifers, we send them a calving ease bull, was what we were producing with that program. If somebody told me they were going to send everything on the truck in the fall, we gave them a growth line bull. So we stacked growth on growth on growth.
And were we doing more AI at that time or more embryo transfer? How would you say that?
It would have been primarily ET, but at that point in time, we still weren't as dialed in as we are now as far as our ET success rates. So in that season, it would have been more like 1 round of ET, maybe some AI behind that, and then we kicked out the old balance bull for cleanup. You know, I was actually just looking at, there's a cow out here I really like, 980, that we were working on the other day, and she is a result of actually that cleanup breeding, turning out the balance bull. She is a daughter of balance, and so those were kind of some different approaches we were taking. We were targeting max calving ease, max growth, max marbling. If somebody told me they had a direct-to-consumer beef program and or sold cattle on the grid, then we would go for just max marbling. Or if somebody said, hey, my goal is to retain daughters, we're expanding our herd, we're building our herd, or we're selling replacement females, then we'd go maximum longevity. But all of those were within Angus in 2018 at that point in time for the initial approach. But after that, what do you recall going after that? Spring of 2019, there would have been a pivotal event in John's favorite breed making its arrival. Do you remember spring of 19?
Spring of 19, you were excited. We had a pregnancy coming. You were really excited about. You're saying it was an Akaushi, and I'm like, what the heck is that? You know, and when I think we had seen some around a little bit, so I knew of them a little bit, but I didn't really know what it was. But we knew that you were excited for it, so we knew it was a big deal. And we had one pregnancy. So we got to get this one right. So we had stalls in the barn. And so we put this cow in the stall and we waited. And one night she calved and we had a cool little Akaushi calf born in the stall there. And I told Seth it was a bull and not a heifer because I know he was expecting a heifer and was very excited for a heifer. So we'll play a little trick on Seth here and see how panicked he gets. But Seth takes jokes pretty good. And it was a cute little heifer. Turned out to be 919. So why don't you tell us about what makes her so special?
Yeah. So going into 2019, at that point in time, I wanted to add some different breeds. So anybody that had been working with us prior to that point in time, so prior to John and I running cattle together, I had been working in genetics prior to that, and it was all just Angus. And so anybody that had been working with me for an extended period of time, it was kind of just Angus on Angus on Angus in those commercial herds. So the goal was, with bringing in 919, which would be Akaushi, and or bringing in some of these other breeds, was to bring in some crossbreeding options so that somebody could harness the power of heterosis or hybrid vigor from crossing those different breeds within these different lines. So I'd mentioned we already had in 2018 the Angus lines, calving ease, growth, marbling, and longevity. In 2019, and I should say, so we made some acquisitions in 2018, started breeding. So for example, the embryos came in 2018, and then that pregnancy arrived in 2019, which is the 919 donor. And we brought in Gelpfie would be one of the breeds we brought in for efficiency. So we brought in some high-end feed efficient genetics there. We brought in brought in Charolais in addition to that for a growth. We call that the Growth X line. So if you were looking for growth but for a cross, we brought in Akaushi specifically that you'd mentioned we called it the Marbling X line. And so people will see actually in the registered name of the 919 donor is Marbling X. And that is why, is that at that point in time, we had those different lines going in Angus, and we brought in these different crosses. And the Akaushi breed was brought in to be the crossbreeding option to add marbling. That was what they were for. So Marbling X was the name of that line, and then the Herefords were brought in for longevity to retain heifers, make black baldy females. So that was the Longevity X line. We went from having 4 lines of calving ease, growth, marbling, longevity to now we had 8 because we brought in these new lines. And so we had efficiency, and then we had, which is Gelpfie. Had Growth X being Charolais. We had Marbling X being Akaushi, and we had Longevity X being Hereford. So that was kind of how we went about that.
Well, I remember just being super excited about having all this different stuff. Like, we have it all. We can offer anybody anything that their herd could possibly need. You know, because we can do all these crosses. We can make anything. Like, this is cool. This is exciting. So then where did we go from there? Like, how did we go from having all these different crosses to now we're a little bit more focused? You know, we still have some of the crosses, but what led into that now?
So between that point and now, it's kind of a testing phase, like I talked about, and all of those different breeds that we brought in, Charolais, Gelpfie, Hereford, and Akaushi, all of them hit the production targets they were brought in to do. You know, the Gelbvieh cattle were efficient. The Hereford cattle were long lasting. The Charolais cattle were incredible to watch gain. I mean, just nuts what they can do for growth curve. You know,
Yeah.
the weaning weight on those cattle was incredible. And the Akaushi cattle did flat out marble. And so all those things were there from a production standpoint. You know, what they were bred to do, they did. But then when it came to the marketing end, which would be the other half of what I do within the company, would be the genetics and the marketing. When it came time to sell those animals, the sales response to Gelbvieh, Hereford, and Charolais, it was okay, but it wasn't anything exciting. You know, it was kind of just, well, you know, they moved, it was all right. It wasn't anything that, boy, was just you know, really knocking them dead. The Akaushi, by contrast, were really surprising. They were only ever brought in with an intent to be basically 1/8 of what we were doing, but they came in and we couldn't keep them in stock. I mean, anything I made sold. You know, I mean, the embryos sold, the pregnancy sold, the calves. I mean, we didn't hardly have calves because everything sold as an embryo or a pregnancy at that point in time. And so just due to the market demand, we continued to add Akaushi. And I always try to be, you know, cautiously optimistic and not double down way too hard, way too fast.
Yeah.
So we didn't go straight from 1, you know, to 100.
Right.
But we did continue to add those Akaushi year over year and kind of double down on that approach.
Yeah. And I think we had a lot of comments that time, and I know you were concerned about maybe the Akaushi just being like a one-hit wonder type of thing. Like they're going to be really good for a year.
Being a fad.
Being a fad.
Yep.
And what makes you think that they're not a fad?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting watching the Akaushi go. I mean, when we brought them in, they were only supposed to be marbling eggs, like make steaks. You know what I mean? Like make a marble, you know? And I had requests for years prior to bringing in Akaushi for Wagyu genetics. And Wagyu, they make a great steak. You know what I mean? Love to eat them. Absolutely. But as far as the practical applications on the production end, you know, when we talk about these other components like calving ease or growth or longevity, they weren't what I was after as far as the black Wagyu cattle. And so the Akaushi or the red Wagyu, seeing those cattle be thicker, stouter, faster growing, more impressive live animals, in addition to being able to produce that high-end steak, started to be eye-opening as far as there were more applications than just the marbling I brought them in for. And so I actually had an interesting experience, you know, there about that time. Went and visited with a friend over the hill here into Cokeville, Wyoming, which is a little higher than we are, a little colder than we are. And he had been having a hard time getting his Angus genetics to last, to do what he needed done there as far as the cattle were just falling out. They weren't getting bred. They weren't holding flesh. The feet weren't holding up. He's having production problems with his cows specifically. And he had some F1 Akaushi cattle quite by accident. That, you know, they kind of came in the cows. He didn't buy them on purpose. It wasn't an intentional test. But these F1 Akaushi cows, he only had just a couple, but they had made it right through to, you know, 6-7 years of age, weaning a calf every year, breeding back on time, holding flesh, feet were excellent. And I thought, there's more to this than just the marbling component that I'd brought him in for. And so I started looking at the maternal applications, and as we went out and visited a bunch of these different ranches, these Akaushi ranches, started to realize these cattle have excellent feet, which the foot issue has become chronic in the Angus deal. It's not just, you know, one subset of cattle or some cattle have problems or whatever else. The foot issue, and I say this as an Angus breeder, is fairly widespread in the Angus deal. It's not just one line of Angus that have some foot problems. And so being able to resolve those with the Akaushi cattle, I mean, I remember going down and seeing a whole fleet of cows that were like 18 years old, you know, and sucking calves, you know what I mean? Like, and it's a challenge to find Angus cows in their teens, you know, that have lasted that long. And so having these cows that, you know, they were long lasting, the feet were excellent. The udders on those cows were tight. They're clearly very fertile. You know, they'd been calving year after year, and they weren't overly big. You know what? A cow that ends up being too big costs too much to feed. And so I thought, you know, there's more application here in these Akaushi than what I'd have initially given them credit for. And that would be why we continue to double down some on some of the Akaushi genetics or add more of those year over year in our embryo transfer program.
The Akaushis, they seem to be doing a lot more than just the carcass cross that you're hoping for, with longevity, with marbling, with maternal qualities, good feet. What do you guys have against the Akaushis?
Yeah, a couple of different things that you'll have that can be challenging. Most commercial outfits here in the West are polled or hornless naturally,
Sure.
and they're black. They're Black Angus based cow herds. You know, they might be Sim Angus, they might be a Hereford cross, but they are a Black Angus based cow herd.
Sure.
And go ahead.
So if these guys are crossing with a red Akaushi on a Black Angus herd, are they going to get red calves, black calves, white calves? What kind of colors are they going to get?
It depends. So it mostly just depends on what all is crossed into that herd initially. So if they have a straight black herd, meaning they're legitimately homozygous black, meaning Angus on Angus on Angus, or black on black on black, they'll still get black calves, even breeding to an Akaushi bull.
Okay.
For that first cross. If they have a recessive red gene or a recessive horn gene from something like Hereford or from something else like Simmental, you can get red calves and or horn calves off those crosses.
Okay. But if they're all black, then they're gonna be black.
Right.
So how explain the horn thing more? So some of them are basically the same thing. The color's kind of the same as the horns. They could get polled, they could get horned,
Right.
depending on what's behind them.
Yep. And so that's the average cow herd. Guys are used to black and they're used to polled. And so if your cow herd has got straight black on black and polled on polled, even bred to an Akaushi, a red horned Akaushi, you'd still get a black polled calf in the first generation cross. But thereafter, they're carrying a recessive gene. They're all heterozygous polled, and they're all heterozygous black. And so if you go into a second generation cross, meaning either A, you had previous red or horn genetics, or B, you do multiple generations crossing to Akaushi, getting red or horn genes in. With 2 generations of that cross, you'll start seeing red calves. Okay. You'll start seeing horns on calves. And so that was one of the things that kind of pointed us towards the polled approach in the Akaushi world, was we wanted to keep the horns off those cattle. So that's one less thing for people to worry about or be concerned about, or one less point of resistance, I guess, or a reason why people wouldn't use them. So.
Yeah. Who wouldn't want a polled one? If you have the choice.
Yeah. So I remember looking through. So we had 919. We had 919, the donor, and totally lucked into the 919 female. I mean, just absolutely has worked out fantastic for us. Been a really, really good female. But the primary direction we took her, and this was for me as a brand new Akaushi breeder. You're looking down through the whole list of bulls, and like you said, I mean, if you could choose between polled or horn, I'm like, well, I'd rather have polled. Dealing with most all the other breeds we're dealing with, they didn't have horns. I wasn't in a hurry to get back to dehorning, go back to my Holstein days as a kid, dehorning calves. If everything else is held constant and, I have to dehorn all of these and I don't have to dehorn those, I'd rather go polled. So King David would be a polled bull that was produced by Heartbrand, and he's a bull that we used extensively and crossed him over that 919 repeatedly. I mean, that was our most common cross that we did over and over through embryo work, was to make that King David 919 cross. And those cattle, there are several animals that really turned out from that cross, from that King David 919 cross. One of your very favorites, the 88 female. Tell us about 88, John. Give us your input on 88. Why do you like 88?
88 is she's my favorite cow we've had as far as handling and management goes. She just moves perfect. She handles perfect. She never causes problems, never gives me attitude, doesn't fight fence. She moves at a speed I want her to move at. She's not too slow, and she's not very fast. Right. So it's just great, and she just always does what I want her to do. So I'm like, I love this cow because she's so easy. Just easy to handle. She doesn't throw a fit anywhere in the chute, in the trailer. Sometimes I'll just stick her with some young heifers just to make the heifers easier to work with or load. I'll stick some of these cows that are easy with a group of young heifers, and the cow will lead the heifers around. So I've always liked 88 because she's almost every cow we've ever had has given me a problem at one time or another, and I don't think that 88 ever has. And so I love her because of her attitude and just how great she is to work, because that's my main thing, is handling the cows. I don't have to breed them and do all the genetics and marketing like you do. But when it comes to moving cows around and getting them fed and into the chute and whatever else we're doing, I'm like, that's my ideal cow right there. Yeah. So she's good that way. Yep. And 919, I mean, she's great too. She had one bad day once, and it wasn't that bad, but it was the one time she threw a fit. So sure. But she's great. And talking about her, and horns, it's like, she has horns on her still. Sure. Yep. So, and go back to that polled stuff, think about, if she didn't have horns, that'd be great, because she had horns. Mm-hmm. We had the vet try to make her polled,
Right.
remove her horns, and it didn't go well. So now she's got these goofy looking horns.
Yeah.
And it's just
got
like,
stubs.
it just got little stubs, and they just look kind of weird. And it's just like, oh man.
Yeah, right.
So these polled stuff, I'm pretty excited about because I'm the guy that's got to chop the horns off or burn them off or however you want to remove them.
Yep.
And we do some of both, and it'd be great if that was one less thing I had to do throughout the year, you know.
Yeah.
But we have Akiushis that have horns, and we have ones that are polled, and you know, when we're sorting those, it's like, oh, thank goodness this one's polled. Oh, another polled one. A horned one. You know. So just on management on my end, I prefer to not have the horns on them.
Absolutely. Well, and oh, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Oh no, it's fine. You can go ahead. So you've crossed King David with 919. What are some of the other matings you've crossed looking for the polled gene or other stuff? What's some of your favorite crosses you've done?
Yeah, so the polled gene, you know, and I guess coming back around to the management end that you mentioned there, I mean, it's a big deal. Any of these, especially these big commercial ranches that haven't dealt with horns in years, they're not about to start. You know, like it's a task. If you don't have to do it, you don't want to do it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's a big deal, and it's traumatic for the calf. It's traumatic for the people. You know, it's an extra job. It's not. I mean, you want to talk about getting animal rights activists up in arms. It's one of those type things, you know,
Sure.
and not like we're going to cater our entire lives to what a different set of people think about how we need to do things. But if it's something that the calf doesn't like it, and you and I as managers don't like it, and people watching from afar of our industry don't like it, like, I mean, and it's this simple to remove, is that we can do it genetically.
Yeah.
Like, it should be done genetically.
Yeah, why not? Right?
Yeah. So that, I mean, that's it's something that we've done a lot of, and it's been interesting. You know, people talk about, you know, and I apologize, kind of jumping around a little bit, but just thoughts as you mentioned of the polled gene and things like that. People within the Akiushi breed have talked about the polled gene, and the idea has been floated that, you know, it's kind of just a fad, like you're talking about, or something that's kind of in and out, or like it was only hot for a year. You know, it was kind of everybody had to have it for a minute, and then. On the breeder side, so the breeder to breeder market, people kind of like, you know, on to the next shiny object, right? But I think that this is one of the challenges that people have is people say, oh man, I can't sell my bulls or things like that. I can't market the bulls. Mm-hmm. And you want to talk about just a basic, simple, easy trait that makes a bull more marketable, the polled gene would be it. And for us, I mean, we're selling those polled bulls like gangbusters, and they go like crazy primarily to commercial producers or to people that just plain and simple don't want to monkey with that horn gene.
Yeah.
And it's a different subset of buyers, so you're not going to trade necessarily. You know, the breeder to breeder market is fairly finite, and it's fairly fickle, you know, and it is a little bit of a flavor of the month kind of a deal, you know, and what's hot and what's new and what's exciting. Sure. If you want to have some consistency or some longevity to your marketing program, you've got to have a commercial buyer base. And our commercial buyer base, most of them are coming from an Angus background, as most in the U.S. are going to. Angus is the king. Yeah. I mean, they're the dominant breed in the U.S., plain and simple.
Right.
And so if they're coming from that basis of like, I don't have to remove horns, and now you come in and say, well, you know, depending on what your genetic base is and whatever else, potentially in this first generation, and for sure by the second, you're going to be dealing with some horns. You're like, well, miss me with that. Like, I don't, you know, like why would I want to monkey with that? So the polled gene has made our bulls very marketable. That has been a big selling point for us in the commercial marketplace. And it is just one less task for us, and it's one less task for them.
Yeah, well, it seems like a lot of the people that I've delivered like these bulls to are, you know, smaller guys that are commercial, that are breeding to the cows that they have, and their end target is selling quality beef.
Yeah.
You know, so those are the guys that there's a huge market for that, right? Like, I mean, most of the ranches in the U.S. are smaller guys. And if you can give them a good option that's like, you're not going to add horns, and you're going to add a lot of marbling and longevity and all these other good traits that the Akiushi bring to the table, these guys are really excited about it, and it can do great things for them and their program. And the meat that they're getting at the end of the game is like awesome. You know, they love it. Their customers love it, and what do you have to say against that? You know, it's just awesome.
Yeah. No, and it has. It's done a really nice job, and I look at the polled gene as far as just eliminating that task, because if you have horns on an animal, if you don't get them removed, now they're a risk to other animals. They're a risk to people. They get stuck in the gate. They get stuck in the feeder. They get stuck in the chute. They're a problem. You cannot leave horns on animals. Like, it happens, but it's a mismanagement issue. Like, when people leave horns on animals, unless they're roping them, you know what I mean? If that's the intent, if that's the goal or the plan.
You're speaking to my dad now. So my dad loves horns because he's Can't rope them if they don't have horns.
So I guess there is.
I think he just needs to
application.
improve his roping. Is what he needs to do. Right? Catch him by the head.
So the horn deal, unless you're roping and looking for a set of horns, there's not a lot of use to them. So they need removed. But then, when it comes time to remove them, I mean, it's causing pain to the calf. It's going to set them back on gains. There's been issues of people I've talked to have had infection problems and things like that with those that open wound that you're leaving there. So there's a lot of risk and just an extra job, extra management, whatever. And so if you can remove them doing nothing other than shifting your genetics a hair, why wouldn't you? So that King David 919 cross would be kind of the basis of our polled program. It produced the 88 donor. It produced the 99 donor, which would in turn be the dam of our all polled 2259 stud. That same cross also produced Davy Crockett, which would be our high selling. The bull we've sold more semen on than any other bull we've ever had is Davy Crockett. And he'd be a King David 919 cross. And then the 1011 donor as well is a King David 919 cross. So that cross, I mean, those cattle kind of check all the boxes.
They're all awesome.
They're good animals.
As far as management goes, I haven't had problems with any of them. They're great and they look good. They look like beef cattle. They don't look like a walking steak.
Right. Yeah.
Gonna fall apart.
Yeah. No, they're super good cattle. So, like you mentioned, as far as different things we added in the polled program as well, we added a couple different donors. Once we had that King David 919 cross going, but we needed some breadth, needed a little bit of room to work genetically in the polled deal. So we added the 577 donor and we added the 6306B donor. So 6306B would be the dam of polled Hikari, and which would be the only polled purebred son of the original import Hikari in the Akaushi breed. So add some outcross genetics in that sense. And then the 577 donor has been prolific for us. We were just working on a series of her donors the other day, or a series for daughters that have now entered the donor pen. And then 577 herself is still in the donor pen. We were just working on all of those within the last week. So
yeah, and she looks great. Like these cattle are they're impressive to look at.
Yep.
We get guys coming to look at them from all over, and they are impressed with the quality that they are. You know, and they look like beef cows.
Right.
And they're not nuts.
Yes.
We've dealt with some crazy in this breed from other places too. So it's really nice to breed our own cows that aren't terrible to deal with.
Right.
They're not hard to handle. They're not. You're not worried about getting run over by them all the time or run through fences.
Yeah.
So
100%.
So where do you see our program going now? I mean, what else have you added to those lines, and what are kind of your goals of where you want the breed to go?
Right. So at this point in time, we've functionally phased out. We still have a little bit of Hereford, a little bit of Shar, pretty well phased out the Geltfies. But the vast majority of what we're breeding is Akaushi. And then we do still have Angus. We maintain our Angus female base. We maintain our Angus bull lease clients, and continue to maintain that program. But the Akaushi breed, like I mentioned, there's more to them than what I thought there would be. The fertility is there. The calving ease is there, or I should say can be. It's not always, not 100% of these lines that are going to calve easy, but it can be selected for. The growth is there. They for sure are going to outperform what the average black Wagyu will do, and they're going to be more similar to Angus in their growth curve. The marbling is absolutely there. After you put it in your freezer once, there's no going back. And I mean, I say that from personal experience. I'm a steak snob now. It's pretty hard to go back to anything else after you have Akaushi in the freezer.
And what makes it so different?
Looking at the beef specifically, obviously the added marbling is there. So even if you were just to look at the steaks side by side, if you look at the average Angus steak and you look at the average Akaushi steak, there's visibly more marbling. But I think one of the things that's most unique about an Akaushi steak, that I really like, is that even if the amount of marbling were the same, so say you have the exact same percentage of intramuscular fat as what the Angus or anything else is, the composition of that fat is different. So there's a higher concentration of monounsaturated fats. There's a higher concentration of oleic acid. So it's more heart healthy beef than what the average beef would be. The fat melting point is lower than what the average beef would be. So it's different to cook. The texture is different. The flavor is different. So if you look at it, it's different. If you cook it, it's different. When you eat it, it's different. The health components are different. And so all of those things, and we've been able to do that on the beef we finish here. Now granted, there's plenty of folks that finish it with corn, but we've been able to achieve those results without corn.
Right.
Even with just a straight forage diet, we've produced excellent end product with enough time on quality forages.
Yeah.
So
Well, you said all those smart and intelligent things about it, with all those fancy words about stuff. All I care about is how does it taste. You know?
Yeah.
And the stuff that we've made here, Seth's gotten good at cooking those in a sous vide cooker. Yeah. And man, that stuff, I mean, even just the hamburger, it has a different, sweeter taste to it that's what sells me on it, you know, and my wife and kids, they all just love it. The flavor of it is completely different than what we're used to with the Angus or the other breeds that we've had and eaten, and my elk and my deer. It's just like that Akaushi beef it has a certain flavor that's just almost addicting.
It's really, really good. Yeah.
And that's the biggest difference to me. Besides the marbling, the marbling I don't really care about as much as just that sweet flavor that it has. That's delicious. I want more of that for sure.
Right, 100%. Well, one example, I mean, like we talk about the flavor aspect of it, and my wife, we had Akaushi steaks and burgers and whatever else in the freezer, and we're used to that. And anyway, we had a bull go down, an Angus bull, and so harvested him just because it was the only thing we could do. And I threw the burger in the freezer, didn't say anything to Haley, they just put it in there. And Haley went and cooked like a casserole, so not even something like not a steak, not a roast, not something that's straight
not
beef,
a hamburger.
Right? Yeah, no, it's pretty well masked. A casserole's got all sorts of other seasonings and other things in it and whatever else. And we went to eat it. And my wife took one bite and she says, "This isn't Akaushi, is it?" No, it's Angus. And I still, I'll still eat Angus. Still, obviously love Angus, produce Angus. There's still a value there, but given the choice, Akaushi is what I want in the freezer, plain
every
and simple.
time. Oh, every time.
Yeah, there's not a question, and that and we don't always get as much Akaushi in the freezer as we want because everybody else wants the same thing. They want all the steers, all the bulls, all the heifers. The marketability has been excellent, on the cattle and so that the beef at the end of the day, all cattle end up as beef, right? Any given animal, bull, cow, heifer, steer, whatever, they all end up as beef. And so if they're all going to end up as beef, it'd just as well be as good a beef as it can possibly be, and that is what we're after with the Akaushi. And I think that as we've gotten further into the breed, some of the things that we've looked to add, because as with any breed, there's strong points. Like I mentioned, the fertility, the calving ease, growth relative to black Wagyu, marbling and longevity are all there. One of the holes within the breed is that there are cattle in Akaushi that are hot. And by hot, I don't mean good looking or exciting or high in temperature. I mean bad in attitude. I had this discussion the other day and I was using the term hot, meaning, that like difficult to handle. And I was talking to this guy and he's like, anyway, we'd gone through it like 2-3 times and I'm like, oh, no. I mean like they're hard to handle, And he's like, oh,
yes. Some people, not us, compare women to cows. We would never do that here.
Never compare to women to cows.
But a hot cow is not the same as a hot woman.
Not a positive thing. No. Yeah. Anyway, so there can be some disposition issues present, right? And in Akaushi, there's some of these cattle that are fast. Again, not being a good thing. You know what I mean? Being difficult to handle, being nervous or flighty or wild or aggressive. And so, I mean, there's so many good traits about the breed. That's one of our primary focuses here, as going forward. Is to add that docility. You know what I mean, and mellow those cattle out, and even going clear back, like you mentioned, to the early days with the polled cattle, the 919 donor, her daughters. The docility's there. Yeah. Those cattle are mellow. All of them. Those cattle are easy to handle. Yep. You are not going to get hurt handling those animals. And that's a big deal. And so, we're trying to do, I guess, two different things, and we'll walk through, I guess, two different subsets of the topic here. But we're trying to add breadth genetically into the Akaushi deal, which would be meaning adding more maternal lines and things like that, so that we have room to work genetically. But as we're doing that, we're trying to keep these production targets in mind, specifically being docility, fertility, calving ease, growth, marbling, and longevity. So whereas back in the early iterations, those all would have been separate things. Yeah. Here we're kind of trying to bring them all together And docility and fertility being the very top two priorities, which weren't necessarily separate lines in the beginning, but those are the top two priorities because if you're in the hospital, the rest of it doesn't matter. Like docility is number one because if you go down, like we're up a creek.
Yeah.
If I go down, we're up a creek. Like our families are banking on us here. And for anybody handling cattle, even if it is just a handful of them on the weekends because you enjoy it, if you get hurt, it takes an awful lot of cows to pay for a hospital bill.
Yeah.
You know, like you can't afford the downtime, you can't afford the risk, and it takes all the enjoyment out of it. I mean, you talked about 88's your favorite, and it's like a happy, positive day when a cow is good to handle.
Yeah.
You know, when a cow is hot or fast or difficult or nervous or flighty or wild or aggressive, it just ruins your whole day, even if she doesn't get you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you've got problems with the disposition into things. So docility would be priority one within our selection criteria.
Across multiple areas of our business, right? Like we've talked about docility with our employees before. So we've had, employees not be the most docile to handle and manage. And they don't last very long.
It doesn't work very good.
So docility, we've decided is our number one thing with our employees and the people we associate with, the people we do business with. If you get an angry customer, it's just terrible to deal with all the time. And they're just angry, like, well, why do business there? And so same with our cows. Docility, we want to enjoy what we're doing and be around people we enjoy and cattle we enjoy.
Right.
And that are safe to be around. So if you got someone constantly nagging at you and complaining or being mad at you, like, we don't want to deal with that, whether it's a landowner that we're leasing pasture from or whatever the case may be. Docility is for sure our number one that we've learned over the years. So
Right. No, absolutely. And that's, one of the things, I mean, we talk about some of these different maternal lines we've added and then correlating that back to these production traits that they would express. The Katie Maru cow, absolutely. If somebody's looking to mellow out Akaushi cattle, improve docility in Akaushi cattle, make them easier to handle. I mean,
is she calm? Like,
no, she's super hard.
Don't we have some videos of you getting chased around the pen by her?
Yeah, she's super difficult. This is sarcasm for anyone not catching.
No, Katie Maru is the cow that I do not pet because I want her to move and go to the barn sometimes, but she's used to being pet and scratched and loved on. And when she sees Seth outside, she actively pursues Seth so she can go get her head and her neck scratched. And I mean, just an awesome cow that way. I mean, Seth gives her shots out in the pen. Like, we don't bring this cow into the chute because she just will stand there and let you give her a shot if you'll scratch her head and give her a hug. And I'm sure Seth has kissed her once or twice. So I haven't witnessed that yet, but he might be a closet cow kisser. I don't know. So, anyways.
So she's mellow.
Go ahead. Yeah, she's mellow, yes.
So she's good to handle, Yeah, so the Katie Maru cow, I mean, a couple of different things there. I mean, and the docility being the first one. So we talk about adding genetic breadth because the Akaushi breed all comes off such a finite number of imports, right? Very, very small group of cows that ever entered the United States. Very, very small group of bulls that ever entered the United States. Katie Maru came in utero, was exported from Japan, and then that calf, the original Katie Maru, was then cloned, and it's the clone that we have here. So adding a female like that, Katie Maru would be the only living daughter of the original Daiten Mitsumaru who never left Japan. So we're able to add something that's really, really distinct genetically because Japan, you can't get any fresh genetics out of Japan, plain and simple. Japan declared Wagyu genetics a national treasure. At this point, you'd have better luck caging and shipping bald eagles. Like, you're not getting fresh Wagyu genetics out of Japan. So what few ever left, that's what we've got to work with.
How many were there?
I need to look back and make sure I'm looking at my exact numbers right. There would have been 6 bulls that left, and that's counting Big Al, who came in utero, again, a Daiten Mitsumaru son who was carried by Akiko. And then the females, I want to say 13. I always have to double check my numbers because it depends on if you're counting the cows that came in utero, like Katie Maru, versus the cows that came in on the hoof, like Akiko. So there'd have been some individuals, and
ballpark, you're like around 20.
You'd be around 20, spitball, right in there, or less. You're probably 19, right in there, 19, 20. Yep. And that,
so not very many.
Not very many at all. I mean, a very, very, very finite group of original Akaushi imports.
So that makes breeding a little bit difficult then.
Yes. Yep. You gotta have a little bit of room to work. You know what I mean? Like even if you get the world's best cow, if all you ever had was just the one world's best cow, you got to have something to breed her to, and you can breed them tight, and line breeding is a positive thing to an extent, but if you never ever had any outcrosses at any point and you're breeding them in perpetuity, the exact same thing back to back to back to back to back, you're going to have problems. And so there does need to be some genetic breadth to work with, and that's where we want to develop a couple of these different lines. And that's why the Katie Maru cow adds both genetic breadth, being one of those original imports, again, the only living daughter of Daiten Mitsumaru, and then adding the docility, which would be a primary point of concern for us from a production standpoint. Yeah. And so that's a cornerstone kind of a cow would be Katie Maru. And then we've brought in other donors as well to give us breadth there again. So 919 that we talked about, the very first one, if you trace the bottom side of her pedigree all the way back to the bottom, that's an Ume maternal line female. So going to be different there again. 121, which would be another one of our cornerstone females. She's a Rushaw daughter. So bringing in some outcross genetics on the top side of the pedigree. But what really makes her unique is how close she is to the Homare original import on the bottom side of the pedigree. She would be a Rushaw over Hikari over Judo over Homare. And so you're bringing in a pretty distinct genetic package there. And again, each of those females is going to add some different things. So Katie Maru makes them mellow, right? Makes them easy to handle, slows them down, makes them pleasure, they're a pleasure to work with. Like, it's not a problem. 919 would be our highest marbling female on actual carcass ultrasound. So if somebody says, hey, I really, really, really got to get prime carcasses every time, 919 is going to get you there. And then if somebody says, hey, I need performance, we need to add some growth, or we're lacking growth, or these cattle aren't weaning heavy enough, the 121 donor consistently is going to add a lot of performance, a lot of growth, a lot of gainability. So again, we're bringing in different maternal lines, we're bringing in different sire lines, and we're bringing in different production traits with some of those cornerstone type females.
Awesome. So someone like me that doesn't speak Japanese, how would I, or someone who's interested in learning more about the breed, without knowing Japanese and all these different names, how do you learn more about the breed? Like, how did you learn so much about, all these different bloodlines? Like, where can people go? I mean,
yeah.
If I was recommending a place to go, I'd just say go to Seth. Like, Seth knows them as good as anybody.
Yeah.
But where else? What other options do people have to, like, how do they? Well, most people don't know about these cows or this breed or these bloodlines or how many there were.
Yeah.
Where do they go to learn more about it?
Sure. Yeah. So, and I have to, tip my hat to all the people that have been willing to educate me or take the time to explain things to me or walk me through different things. And I think spending time just researching the pedigrees, there's not really any replacement for having spent the time in the database, in any one of the breed association databases. So if you go into the Akaushi Association and or the American Wagyu Association and or the Australian Wagyu Association, you can go back through all those pedigrees and really get a feel for it that way. Really grateful for all the folks that have taken the time to visit with me as I've gone through and as we've sourced these different lines, because that's kind of been how that's all come to be, has been digging through all those pedigrees, reading through all those different things, and then finding the owners of those different animals that have bred those different animals or that own those different animals, and then calling those people up and picking their brain and learning from them. And people have been generous with their time and willing to take me through cattle, and it has taken, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of miles, it's a lot of hours to go to these ranches, meet these people, look at these cattle, learn about these bloodlines. But I think there's value there in understanding what these animals are. I'd say that's one of the challenges right now that we look at in Akaushi, and looking at kind of where the breed is and where the breed's going. Sometimes there's some fascination just with those 6 bulls, right? So the 6 bulls would be Big Al, Tamamaru, Shigamaru, Rushaw, Judo, and Hikari. Okay, so they're only ever the 6 bulls. And those are all original import sires, and people will get really, really hyper focused on those, like, oh, well, it's a Big Al, so it has to be good, or it's a Judo, so it has to be good, or whatever. And there is value there as far as the outcross or things like that. But if the bottom side of that pedigree isn't anything at all, then are we really moving forward? You know what I mean? If it's not a cow that really adds value to that pedigree, if all we ever do is use those same 6 sires, those same foundation bulls over and over again in succession, all we're doing is breeding around average, right? So we're circling the toilet bowl around average. You use the same bulls over and over again in a circle. Those bulls are what built the breed. And so I think learning the importance of maternal lines and understanding the differences that these different females bring to the table. What's the difference between, an Ume or a Homare or an Akiko or these different things that you can put on the bottom side of the pedigree. And then not just the pedigree, looking at the performance implications, because just like we were talking about, docility being a key example.
Yeah.
If this cow has the coolest pedigree there ever was, but she's absolutely terrible, she's going to threaten your life every time you deal with her.
Yeah.
You don't want her anyway. You know what I mean? Like there needs to be. So are pedigrees a part of the puzzle? Yes, absolutely. Is how the animal is in person a part of the puzzle? Yes, absolutely. But I think it's important not to lose sight of one or the other, and make sure you have all of the different components present, sure. When breeding these cattle. And that's one of the things we've tried to do, is tried to give people enough room to work genetically, give them these different maternal lines, give them these different paternal lines. But then also focus on those selection criteria, make sure these cattle are mellow. And they're mellow not because like, oh, well, I heard they were mellow or whatever. Like they're mellow because you and I are out there working with them all day, every day, and we know they're mellow, And then when it comes to fertility, and taking a look at that selection criteria, that we know those cattle breed quickly and easily, that we know those cattle, flush and produce embryos and do well. It's measured, things like that. Calving ease, again, you and I know if they needed to be polled or not. Yeah. Were they born unassisted? Were they not? Growth. You and I know what did they weigh coming across the scale. Yeah. Were they at the top end of the group? Were they at the bottom end of the group? Are they average within the group? Marbling, again, looking at the carcass ultrasound and or the actual carcass in the freezer, the steaks we're eating, are they good or are they not? Are they better than average or worse than average? Are they at the top of the bell curve or the bottom? And then longevity, just how many years can they do that back to back to back to back? How many years can we make that happen? And so I think it's important that people understand just because it's a certain pedigree, that's not the whole thing. Just because an animal looks a certain way, it's not the whole thing. There's a lot of pieces that need to be looked at to genuinely move these cattle forward and make them legitimately better. And like I mentioned, when it comes to the original import bulls, the original import bulls are neat. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's value there in adding those outcross genetics or in maintaining those different sire lines and in maintaining the different maternal lines that I mentioned. But if all we ever do is just say, well, it's a cool, rare, difficult to get, this is the bull that's hot or whatever, are we actually moving the breed forward, right? Or are we actually improving the cattle? And that's where I'm most excited, looking at our next generation animals, both our next generation donors and our next generation studs. They're not in the donor pen or the stud pen just because the paper said they were cool. Yeah. They are in the donor pen or the stud pen because they're easy to handle, they're easy to breed, they calve easy, they grow quickly, they scan high, and they last a long time. And they're doing all that in addition to adding the polled gene, or in addition to adding Rucha on the top side of the pedigree, in addition to adding Katamaroo on the bottom side of the pedigree. Sure. Some of these different and neat things. And that's what I see. I'm most excited about our next generation studs and donors is what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, as you should be.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff coming. And like seeing the improvement just from 2019 when we calved our first one to now these ones that we're implementing now from Katamaroo and we have all these other ones that they just look awesome. These calves that are born, you can tell they're different. You can tell that they're better. You can tell their attitudes are better. So every year it's just getting better and better. It's cool to see your selection criteria and what you're actually moving forward, and that you have a goal and a direction that you're moving our company in, and the cattle herd and the Akushi breed as a whole in. Like it's moving forward, it's growing. Right. These cows are improving. These bulls are improving. Like that's awesome.
Yep. And that would be, my invitation, I guess I'd make to people, anyone that's breeding cattle, whether that's Angus or that's Akushi or that's whatever else, define what it is that matters to you and then breed for that, and I think it's important to tune out the noise a little bit. The most common breeding objective I hear is like, well, I want to make the best, or I want to make the most valuable. Okay, so define the best, right? Yeah. The values, the dollar values that things trade at are going to correlate with what's actually good or what's not, or what's desired by the marketplace or not. But if your whole breeding program is literally geared around like, well, these ones sold really hot, so we're going to do more of that, or well, I heard this is going to be hot, so we're going to do more of that, you're never going to have enough direction to make generational change when it comes to breeding cattle. It takes too long. It's a long time from the time we breed the animal to we calve the animal to we raise the animal to we see if it turns out or not to we do the next generation cross. It's a lot of time. So I think there needs to be direction. For anybody that's breeding cattle, you've just got to decide what matters to you. And so for us, if we're trying to add docility, we're going to go with Katie Maru, and that we're using a lot of Katie Maru right now. Like I said, there's so much good in Akaushi cattle. The most common flaw would be some attitude issues. So we're trying to correct those with Katie Maru and those Katie Maru genetics and mellow those cattle out. If somebody's looking to add fertility, the way we accomplish that most often would be either, the Ume female, the 919 female does all of the above really well. The Himawari cow that we have, 9961Y, that female flushes really, really hard, has bred tight back to back to back to back.
She's a machine.
12 natural calves on the ground. And the last one she weaned, fantastic calf, impressive calf, thick calf, a heavy weaning calf. And that's not a heavy cow. That's a cow that weighs under 1,000 pounds. Yep. Light cow, easy to feed, perfect udder, perfect feet, incredible production record. And so that's a female. I would like to mellow her some. So naturally we're crossing her to sons of Katie Maru. So I would say for us, docility would be Katie Maru. Fertility would be Himawari at this point in time, if I was going to say one maternal line that's going to get that done or accomplish that objective for us. If we're going to calving ease, I would say, and this is one thing that's important to be aware of, calving ease is present in the breed. The bulk of the breed are going to calve really easy. Not all of them calve really easy. So overall, calving ease, I wouldn't say that I've got pegged exactly this line is going to do it every time, or this is what's done it every time. But I think it's an important thing to watch.
Can you overdo it on calving ease too?
Yes. Yeah. If you're pushing it clear down to now you're sub 50 pounds all the time, that's a problem.
Yeah, these little tiny 50 pounders aren't fun to deal with either.
Too small is not cool. Too big is not cool. Yeah. And so targeting and understanding, I think it's important for people to understand that sometimes we get our heads stuck on birth weight. It's like, they got to be 65 pounds to be calving ease. It's baloney. If you've got a cow that weighs 1,600 pounds, which a lot of these Angus cows will do, a big Angus cow, she's going to have an 85-pound calf and not bat an eye. She'll have a 95-pound calf and not bat an eye most all the time. Yep. And so an 85-pound calf is not something to be, oh, my word. Now, granted, understand it's in perspective. An 85-pound calf out of a 1,600-pound cow, no big deal. Yep. An 85-pound calf out of an 800-pound heifer could be a problem, right?
For sure.
And so that's
for sure going to be a problem.
So it's important to understand, the difference between those things. Looking at growth, and if somebody's looking to add growth, the Homare maternal line, the 121 donor, the Rushaw 121 female, would add growth and performance as well as any. Marbling, again, the 919 female, the Ume maternal line, she'd be a Big Al, Hikari, Shigemaru Ume is how she's bred. And would do a nice job for you adding that. If somebody's looking at adding longevity, I'd probably come right back around to that Himawari cow. To have one that has put 12 calves on the ground back to back like that, tight, same calving season, and held up perfectly, it's pretty hard to fault that. So those would be, I guess, a couple of the different things that we've done. And then, anytime you can work in some of these other details, I guess I would say, adding in an animal that can be registered in multiple associations, great. That's a positive. Adding in an animal that carries the POLD gene, that's great. That's a positive. But everyone, I think, is going to have to find for an individual program what matters most to you, prioritize it, and then focus on that rather than just trying to chase, what does everybody else think is most popular or what's hot? Because by the time you breed it, calve it, and raise it, it's not going to be hot anymore. Focus on breeding cattle that are actually better, not just trying to chase what's hot. Hey guys, Seth Christensen here with Christensen Genetics, and we've been talking about the 9961Y female on the podcast today. 9961Y is the only Himawari maternal line female in the entire American Wagyu Association database. This rare foundation pedigree holds only 3 foundation animals: Tama Maru over Big Al over Himawari. 9961Y calved 12 times back to back to back to back every year in the same calving season without fail, and her 12th calf weaned off of this 13-year-old cow looked fantastic. 9961Y herself maintains a perfect top, a strong udder, and an excellent foot as a 13-year-old female, and she is a productive embryo donor. The initial release of embryos from 9961Y will be on January 15th in the Christensen Genetics auction. Mark on your calendar January 15, 9961Y embryos for the initial release on this next generation Himawari maternal line female.
Speaking of the associations, you mentioned 3 different associations.
Yeah. Yep.
Is one better than the other? I mean, I feel like this topic is almost like Ford, Dodge, Chevy,
Right.
where it can be pretty sensitive,
and
and somebody might be, I'm only a Dodge guy, or I'm only a Ford guy. I mean, what's the deal with the associations? Like, is there one that's better than the others? What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, so we end up using all 3 associations. We do have cattle registered with the American Akiushi Association, the American Wagyu Association, and the Australian Wagyu Association. For us overall, the Akiushi Association is the simplest to work with. It's very cost effective, very, very helpful office, good people, and it is specifically Akiushi cattle. The other 2 associations are going to have black Wagyu cattle registered with the Akiushi or red Wagyu cattle in the same association. So depending on who you ask, there's pros and cons to any one of the 3. I would say, the Akiushi, again, probably, simplest, easiest, most focused, most cost effective. Really enjoy working with the Akiushi Association, do a lot of work with them. There are some people that say, hey, we need American Wagyu Association papers. That's what we want. That's what we're requesting. That's what, we're after. And so we do have a good chunk of the cattle that are registered with the American Wagyu Association. And it's just, I guess, keeps a market door open. If people are concerned about that's what I need is those American Wagyu papers, then we'll do that. The American Wagyu Association is going to have the most limited selection of red Wagyu genetics or Akiushi genetics. There are less of them there. So for better or for worse, better in the sense of, I guess, they're maybe more exclusive in that sense. Worse in the sense of they're more exclusive. There's less of those cattle present, less to work with. Can be a little more challenging to get cattle registered there. The Australian herd book is focused on data, has probably the most developed EBV system. There's a lack of data, or can be, in any one of the 3. So I would say, take that with a grain of salt, anything you look at on EPDs or EBVs. But that's kind of the pros and cons to the 3, and we do have cattle registered with all 3. So
wonderful. So anyone out there looking to learn more about any of this, me being who I am, I wouldn't want to travel all over the country and talk to people all over the world and research all the lines and everything like you have. Yep. So me personally, I would probably recommend people to go to gotanycows.com, get on our website. You can hit the Learn tab to learn more about stuff that we have on there. Seth is always available to call, text, email, Facebook message, whatever you do. Seth will talk to you on that. He's a great source of information and knowledge. He's done a little bit of his homework on the breed and the cows as a whole. If you haven't been able to tell that from this podcast, Sure. I don't know that he speaks Japanese, but sometimes it sounds like it. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add about the Akiushi breed as a whole, or the direction that we're going? Anything else you have left to add on today's podcast?
Like John said, I'm always happy to chat with anybody directly or in person. I think each operation is going to be distinct and unique as far as exactly what they're trying to do or how they're trying to get there. And I'm always happy to help in any way that I can, try to match the right genetics to the right program. That's been a goal from the beginning, with these different genetic packages, match the right animal to the right program. I'd always ask that people be patient with me. I'm not always, especially right now we're in December and January, we're breeding a lot of cows right now. We're AIing cows all day. We're setting cows up for embryo transfer all day. I'm trying to be as responsive as I can. I may not get back to you immediately. I will get back to you, is what I would say to anybody that reaches out. I am always happy to help. Would love to help move your program forward. If I don't get back to you right away, I am not intentionally trying to be slow. I'm trying to get all the cows here bred in addition to responding to people, but I'll do anything I can to help and try to help move your program forward. And I would say, keep an eye on the website there, like John mentioned, hop on and subscribe there, and you'll get updates on the different genetics that we have become available, new bulls that we add to the program, new donors that we add to the program, embryo pregnancies, calves, all of the above are right there at gotanycows.com. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, and visit us anytime at gotanycows.com.